The gunshot cracked through the still morning air as Josephine Foster emptied the chamber of her father's pistol into a weathered oak tree, each bullet striking with remarkable precision. At 18, she had become as skilled with firearms as any man in Willow Creek, though such talents were hardly celebrated in a young woman. Today, however, she wasn't practicing, she was furious. "I will not marry him," she shouted at the empty field, her voice carrying across the golden plains of Wyoming Territory, 1875. The early summer sun beat down mercilessly, much like her father's stubbornness had pounded away at her resistance for weeks. Josephine Jo, to those who knew her well, wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, smudging dirt across her freckled face. Her auburn hair had mostly escaped its braid, wild tendrils framing her face like flames, matching the fire in her emerald eyes. She reloaded the pistol with trembling hands, the gravity of her situation making each movement clumsy. 62, she muttered, loading the final bullet. The man is 62 years old. Her father had announced it at dinner 3 nights ago. She was to marry Judge Harold Whitaker, the wealthiest man in the territory and a widower 3 times over. At 38 years her senior, he was older than her own father. The arrangement would save their struggling ranch and secure her future, or so her father claimed. Another shot rang out, this time missing the tree entirely. "You are wasting good ammunition, Miss Foster." Jo whirled around, pistol still raised, to find a tall figure leaning against a nearby fence post. Backlit by the morning sun, his features were shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she'd recognize that drawl anywhere. Yates Morgan, the troublesome cowboy who'd been working their ranch for the past 6 months. "And you are trespassing on a private moment, Mr. Morgan," she replied, lowering the gun. He stepped forward, and Jo noted, not for the first time, how his presence seemed to immediately shrink the vast Wyoming landscape around them. At 24, Yates was tall and lean, with shoulders broadened by years of hard labor. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to read thoughts better left unspoken. "Your father sent me to find you. Says the judge is coming to finalize the arrangements this afternoon." Jo's stomach twisted. "There's nothing to finalize. I won't marry him." Yates moved closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "That pistol shooting suggests otherwise." He bent down to pick up a spent shell casing. "You're usually a better shot." "I'm distracted." "By thoughts of murdering the judge?" His voice held a hint of amusement. Despite herself, Jo laughed. "Don't tempt me." She holstered the pistol in the belt around her waist. "My father sold me to pay his debts, Mr. Morgan. Like livestock." Yates studied her face, his expression unreadable. "What if there was another way?" Jo scoffed. "Unless you've discovered gold on our property, I don't see how." "What if you were already married?" The question hung in the air between them. Jo stared at him, trying to discern if he was mocking her. "To whom exactly?" she asked cautiously. His eyes never left hers as he replied, "To me." The boldness of his statement knocked the wind from her lungs. "That's not funny." "I'm not laughing," Yates said, his voice steady. "Judge Whitaker can't marry a woman who already has a husband." Jo's mind raced. Yates Morgan was her father's hired hand, a drifter who'd shown up looking for work last winter. He was competent, quiet, and kept to himself mostly, though she'd caught him watching her more than once when he thought she wasn't looking. "My father would never allow it," she said finally. "I'm not suggesting we ask his permission." Yates took another step closer. "The circuit preacher arrives in Willow Creek tomorrow. We could be married by noon." Jo narrowed her eyes. "Why would you do this?" "Perhaps I have my reasons for not wanting to see you with Judge Whitaker. You'd be fired. Maybe worse." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "I've been fired from better jobs, Miss Foster." Jo turned away, her mind spinning with possibilities. Marriage to Yates would be reckless, foolish even. She barely knew him, and yet, something about his steady gaze made her believe him. "This is madness," she whispered. "So is marrying a man old enough to be your grandfather." The distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Jo looked toward the ranch house and saw a cloud of dust rising from the road. Her time was running out. "He's early," she said, panic rising in her throat. Yates followed her gaze. "You don't have to decide now, but if you want my help, meet me behind the livery at midnight." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Mr. Morgan," Jo called after him. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Why did you really come looking for me?" His expression softened. "Your father didn't send me, Jo. I came because I heard what he's planning." The use of her informal name didn't escape her notice. No one should be forced to marry against their will, not even stubborn sharpshooters who waste good ammunition. With that, he was gone, striding across the field toward the barn, leaving Jo to stare after him, the weight of his proposal settling around her shoulders like a new coat, unfamiliar but not entirely unwelcome. The dinner that evening was unbearable. Judge Whitaker sat at their table, his rheumy eyes following Jo's every movement as she served the meal her father had insisted she prepare. His thinning white hair was meticulously combed over his spotted scalp, and his hands trembled slightly when he raised his wine glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his gaze lingering on Jo's bodice. "And to your lovely daughter, Thomas. A vision of youth and beauty." Jo's father beamed with pride. "She'll make you a fine wife, Harold. She can be headstrong, but nothing a firm hand can't correct." The judge chuckled. "I've tamed more difficult cases in my courtroom." Jo gripped her fork so tightly her knuckles turned white. They spoke of her as if she weren't present, as if she were a prized mare being sold at auction. "When do you propose we hold the ceremony?" her father asked, cutting into his steak. Judge Whitaker dabbed at his mouth with a napkin. "I see no reason to delay. 2 weeks should be sufficient to prepare. I have a new home nearly completed in town, 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen." He smiled at Jo. "Room for a nursery, of course." The implication made Jo's stomach turn. She set down her fork, appetite gone. "Father, may I be excused? I'm feeling unwell." Thomas Foster frowned. "You've barely touched your food. The judge will think you an ungrateful hostess." "Let the girl go, Thomas," the judge said magnanimously. "Female nerves can be delicate before a wedding. We have much to discuss anyway, matters of dowry and such." Jo didn't wait for her father's permission. She rose from the table and fled to her room, fighting the urge to slam the door behind her. Through her window, she could see the barn where she knew Yates would be finishing evening chores. The crazy idea he'd proposed that morning now seemed like her only escape. Hours later, when the house had fallen silent and the judge had departed, Jo quietly packed a small bag. She took only necessities: a change of clothes, her mother's locket, and the money she'd saved from selling eggs at the general store. After a moment's hesitation, she added her father's pistol and ammunition. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she crept down the hallway past her father's room. Outside, the night was clear, the moon casting enough light to guide her path to the barn. She saddled her mare, Penny, and led her quietly away from the house before mounting and riding toward town. Willow Creek was silent at this hour, the only light coming from the saloon at the far end of the main street. Jo tethered Penny behind the livery as instructed and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You came." Yates emerged from the shadows, leading his own horse, a sturdy Palomino. He wore his best shirt, she noticed, and had trimmed his beard. "I'm not convinced this isn't madness," Jo admitted. "It probably is." He adjusted his horse's saddle. But sometimes madness is preferable to a life sentence. Where will we go? I have a friend with a small spread near Laramie. We can stay there until we figure things out. And then what? Yates shrugged. That depends on you. This marriage can be whatever you want it to be, Joe. I gave my word to protect you, not to claim you. His consideration surprised her. My father will come looking. Likely so. But a legal marriage is binding, and the judge won't want the scandal of pursuing another man's wife. He offered her a hand up to her mare. Are you certain about this? Joe took one last look at the sleeping town, at the life she was leaving behind. No, she admitted. But I'm even less certain about becoming the fourth Mrs. Whitaker. Yates nodded. Then let's ride. We need to reach Coopersville by morning if we want to catch the preacher. They rode through the night, keeping off the main trails. Joe had never traveled more than a day's ride from her father's ranch, and the vastness of the territory both frightened and exhilarated her. Beside her, Yates remained mostly silent, occasionally pointing out landmarks or suggesting they rest the horses. As dawn broke, they reached the outskirts of Coopersville, a town even smaller than Willow Creek. They stopped at a creek to wash up and rest the horses. The preacher holds service at 9, Yates said, checking his pocket watch. That gives us time to eat and make ourselves presentable. Joe smoothed her wrinkled dress, suddenly self-conscious. I don't look much like a bride. Yates's eyes traveled over her, not unkindly. You look fine to me. The sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly look at him not as her father's hired hand, but as the man who was about to become her husband. His features were striking in the morning light, his jaw strong, his eyes the color of a summer sky. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Why are you really doing this? She asked. The truth this time. Yates was quiet for a long moment. I've known men like Judge Whitaker, seen what happens to young women who fall into their power. His expression hardened. My sister was 16 when she was married off to a man of 50. He broke her spirit long before consumption took her body. Joe's throat tightened. I'm sorry. I couldn't save her. He met Joe's gaze. But I can help you. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was honest. Joe realized that was enough for now. They entered the town just as the church bell was ringing, calling the faithful to Sunday service. The small white chapel sat at the edge of town, its spire pointing toward the heavens. A few curious glances followed them as they hitched their horses and approached the building. The service was brief, the congregation small. When it ended, Yates approached the preacher, a kindly older man with spectacles perched on his nose. Reverend Miller, my name is Yates Morgan. This is Josephine Foster. We were hoping you might marry us today. The preacher looked between them, noting their travel-worn appearance. You two elope? Not exactly, Joe said. But we are in something of a hurry. Reverend Miller seemed to understand more than they were saying. Well, I don't normally perform weddings without proper notice, but he glanced at Joe's anxious face. I suppose the Lord's work doesn't always follow schedules. You have witnesses? The church caretaker and his wife served for a couple last month. A woman interjected, stepping forward. She was the preacher's wife, a plump, maternal woman with kind eyes. I'm sure they wouldn't mind helping again. Within the hour, Joe found herself standing before the altar, repeating vows she'd never expected to say, certainly not to a man she barely knew. Yates's hands were steady as he placed a simple gold band on her finger where he'd gotten it. She didn't ask. His eyes never left hers as he promised to protect and cherish her, his voice clear and unwavering. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Miller declared. You may kiss your bride. Joe hadn't considered this part. A moment of panic flashed through her as Yates stepped closer, his hand gently tilting her chin upward. His kiss was brief, respectful, but Joe was surprised by the warmth that spread through her at the touch of his lips. "Mrs. Morgan," he whispered as he drew back, a hint of a smile on his face. The name sounded foreign to her ears. Josephine Morgan. No longer her father's property, but this man's wife. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. They signed the marriage certificate. Yates paid the preacher generously, and they were back on their horses within the hour, this time riding openly on the main road toward Laramie. "Your friend," Joe said as they rode. "Will he be surprised when you arrive with a wife?" Yates chuckled. "Jackson's not easily surprised. He owes me a favor anyway. I helped him clear his land last spring. And he won't mind me staying? His wife, Martha, will be glad of the company. They have 2 young children and a third on the way." Joe relaxed slightly. The presence of another woman was reassuring. They made camp that night in a sheltered grove. Yates built a small fire and shared the provisions he'd packed: jerky, hardtack, and coffee. As they ate, Joe realized how little she knew about the man she'd just married. "Where are you from?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Originally, Yates poked at the fire. "Virginia, though we moved west after the war. My father couldn't abide living under Union rule." "You fought in the war?" "I was too young. My brother never came home." He took a sip of coffee. "What about you?" "Your father mentioned once that you weren't born in Wyoming." "St. Louis," Joe replied. "We came west after my mother died. Father thought the frontier would offer better opportunities." "Do you miss it? City life?" Joe considered the question. "I was only 12 when we left. I remember gaslight and cobblestone streets, proper tea parties and piano lessons." She smiled at the memory. "But I've grown to love the open spaces here, the freedom of it." "Freedom," Yates repeated. "Ironic, considering your father's plans for you." "He wasn't always like this," Joe said defensively. "The drought these past 2 years, the debts. It changed him." Yates nodded, understanding. "Hard times reveal a man's true character." "And what about your character, Mr. Morgan?" Joe asked, studying him across the fire. "What would hard times reveal about you?" His eyes met hers, reflecting the dancing flames. "I suppose you'll find out, won't you, Mrs. Morgan?" The way he said her new name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Joe looked away, suddenly aware of their solitude and the intimacy of their situation. They were husband and wife now, at least in name. "I'll take first watch," Yates said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "You should get some rest. We have another long day of riding tomorrow." Joe nodded gratefully and retreated to the bedroll he'd laid out for her, a respectful distance from his own. As she drifted toward sleep, she wondered what her father was doing, if he'd discovered her absence yet, if he was already searching for her. The thought should have terrified her, but with Yates's steady presence nearby, she found herself strangely unafraid. They reached the Jackson homestead the following afternoon. It was a modest spread, a sturdy log cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a green valley with a creek running along one edge. A woman came to the door as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron, 2 small children peering around her skirts. "Yates Morgan, as I live and breathe," she called, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Jackson said you might be passing through, but we weren't expecting you for weeks yet." Yates dismounted and helped Joe down from her mare. "Martha, this is Josephine, my wife." Martha's eyes widened, flicking between them in surprise. "Your wife? When did this happen?" "Yesterday," Joe admitted, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Martha's surprise quickly gave way to delight. "Well, isn't that something? Come in, come in." You must be exhausted from your journey. The inside of the cabin was warm and inviting, the main room dominated by a large table and a stone fireplace. Martha shooed her children, a boy of about 5 and a girl of 3, toward their father, who had just entered from the back of the house. Jackson was a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh who embraced Yates like a brother. "Should have known you'd show up just as we're getting ready for branding," he joked, before turning to Joe with genuine warmth. "Welcome to our home, Mrs. Morgan." The next few days passed in a blur of domestic activity. Martha insisted that Joe and Yates take the small bedroom at the back of the house while they sorted out more permanent arrangements. Joe helped with cooking and minding the children, while Yates joined Jackson in the fields and with the livestock. Each night, Joe would lie awake, aware of Yates sleeping on a pallet on the floor beside the bed, maintaining his promise to respect her boundaries. They hadn't discussed how long this arrangement would continue, or what their future might hold beyond hiding from her father's wrath. On their 4th evening at the homestead, after the children were asleep, Martha sat with Joe by the fire, mending clothes. "So," Martha said, her needle flashing in the firelight, "are you going to tell me the real story, or shall I keep pretending this was a love match?" Joe's hands stilled on the shirt she was repairing. "What do you mean?" Martha gave her a knowing look. "I've known Yates Morgan for 3 years. Never once mentioned a sweetheart, let alone having marriage on his mind. Then he shows up with a bride young enough to still have schoolroom ink on her fingers." She set down her sewing. "I'm not judging, dear. We all have our reasons for the choices we make." Joe hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My father arranged for me to marry a man 62 years old, a judge with influence and money." Martha's expression softened. "Ah. And Yates offered an alternative." "Yes. Though I'm still not entirely sure why." "Aren't you?" Martha glanced toward the door, where the men's voices could be heard outside. "That man may not say much, but his actions speak volumes. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Joe's cheeks warmed. "We barely know each other. Sometimes that's how the best marriages start, with a clean slate." Martha resumed her sewing. "Jackson and I knew each other 3 weeks before we wed. 15 years and 3 children later, I'd say it worked out fine." The conversation lingered in Joe's mind as she prepared for bed that night. When Yates entered the room, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, brushing out her long hair. He paused in the doorway. "I can come back later." "No, it's fine." Joe set down her brush. "This is your room too." Yates moved to his pallet, removing his boots. Joe watched him surreptitiously, noting the careful way he kept his eyes averted, respecting her privacy. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. He looked up. "Of course. At the church. Where did you get the ring?" Yates's expression grew solemn. "It was my mother's. I've carried it since she passed." Joe touched the simple band on her finger. "I had no idea. It's too precious, I shouldn't be wearing it." "She would have wanted you to have it." He hesitated. "She always said it should go to the woman who would be my wife." "But this isn't a real marriage," Joe said softly. Yates held her gaze. "It's as real as the law recognizes. Whether or not it becomes more than that, that's for you to decide, Joe." The air between them seemed to thicken. Joe was acutely aware of his proximity, of the intensity in his blue eyes. For a moment, she thought he might move closer, might breach the careful distance he'd maintained since their hasty wedding. Instead, he extinguished the lamp and lay down on his pallet. "Good night, Josephine." "Good night, Yates," she whispered into the darkness, strangely disappointed. The next morning, their peaceful routine was shattered. Joe was hanging laundry with Martha when they heard riders approaching, a group of at least 6 men, dust rising behind them. "Jackson's not expecting anyone," Martha said. her hand instinctively moving to her pregnant belly. Joe's blood ran cold as she recognized the lead rider. "It's my father." Martha's eyes widened. "Get inside. I'll send the children to the root cellar." Joe hurried into the house, her heart pounding. Through the window, she watched as her father, Judge Whitaker, and 4 other men dismounted. Yates and Jackson emerged from the barn, intercepting them before they reached the house. "Where is she?" Thomas Foster demanded, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. Yates stood his ground. "If you're referring to my wife, she's inside." "Wife?" Her father spat on the ground. "That's a farce, and you know it. You stole her away, forced her into this sham marriage. I assure you, sir, the marriage is legal and consensual." Yates's voice remained calm. "Performed by Reverend Miller in Coopersville, with witnesses and proper documentation." Judge Whitaker stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Whatever paperwork you've procured can be easily invalidated. Coercion, misrepresentation, there are numerous grounds." Joe couldn't stand it any longer. She pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch. "There was no coercion. I left of my own free will." Her father's face contorted with rage. "Get your things, Josephine. You're coming home." "No, father. I'm already home." "You ungrateful child." He started toward her, but Yates moved to block his path. "Mr. Foster, I understand your anger, but Josephine is my wife now, and she's made her choice clear." "Her choice?" The judge laughed harshly. "The girl is barely 18. She doesn't know what's good for her." Joe descended the steps, moving to stand beside Yates. "I know that being sold like cattle to a man 3 times my age isn't what's good for me." The judge's face darkened. "You'd do well to mind your tongue, girl. This isn't over." "I believe it is," Yates said firmly. "You're trespassing on private property now. I suggest you leave before this situation becomes more unpleasant." Joe noticed that Jackson had positioned himself near the barn, rifle in hand. The 4 men with her father and the judge shifted uncomfortably. Thomas Foster glared at his daughter. "Is this truly what you want? To throw away everything for this drifter? A man with nothing to his name." Joe took Yates's hand, feeling his fingers close around hers. "He has me to his name now. And yes, this is what I want." Her father studied her face for a long moment, then turned away. "You're no daughter of mine." The word stung, but Joe stood her ground. "I'm sorry you feel that way." Judge Whitaker looked as though he wanted to say more, but one of the men with them, the sheriff from Willow Creek, Joe realized, placed a hand on his arm. "Let it go, Harold. They're legally wed. Nothing to be done." With a final venomous glance, the judge allowed himself to be led back to his horse. The group mounted and rode away, her father never looking back. Joe's legs trembled as the adrenaline drained from her body. Yates's arm came around her waist, supporting her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low with concern. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "They might come back," Jackson warned, joining them. Yates's jaw tightened. "I know. We should move on, find somewhere further from their reach." "No," Joe said suddenly. "I'm tired of running, of hiding. I won't let them chase us across the territory." "Joe, it's not safe. This is your home," she insisted, gesturing to the land around them. "Martha told me you helped Jackson build this place, that you own part of it." Yates exchanged a glance with Jackson. "I do. But then we stay and fight if we have to." Joe squared her shoulders. "I won't let them take anything else from us." Yates studied her face, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. "All right," he said finally. "We stay, but we take precautions." That night, they gathered around the table to discuss plans. Jackson suggested building a separate cabin for Joe and Yates on the eastern edge of the property. "The land there is good," he said. "Close enough that we can help each other, far enough to give you privacy." "We can start tomorrow," Yates agreed. "Get the foundation laid before winter." Joe listened to the men plan, feeling a strange sense of belonging. For the first time in years, decisions about her future weren't being made for her. She was part of the conversation, her opinions valued. When they retired to their room, the atmosphere between Joe and Yates had shifted. The confrontation with her father had changed something, cemented their alliance in a way that mere words could not. "Thank you," she said as they prepared for bed, "for standing with me today." Yates paused in removing his shirt. "You're my wife. Where else would I stand?" The simple declaration moved her deeply. "Is that how you see me? Truly?" He turned to face her fully. "From the moment you agreed to meet me that night, you became more to me than just Thomas Foster's daughter. And today, seeing you stand your ground against your father and that judge." He shook his head in admiration. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Josephine Morgan." The use of her married name sent a thrill through her. Impulsively, Joe closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. Yates froze for an instant, then his arms came around her, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with a gentleness that made her heart ache. When they parted, both breathless, Joe saw a question in his eyes. "I don't want you sleeping on the floor anymore," she whispered. "Joe," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I don't want to rush you into anything." She placed a hand on his cheek. "You've given me freedom, protection, a future. I'm not being rushed. I'm choosing." That night, they truly became husband and wife, their union sealed not by the preacher's words but by their own choice, their own desire. Joe discovered that Yates's calm exterior hid a depth of passion that matched her own. And in his arms, she found a belonging she hadn't known she was seeking. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and unexpected joy. True to their word, the men began construction on a cabin for Joe and Yates. Joe helped where she could, learning to notch logs and mix mortar. In the evenings, she and Martha preserved food for the coming winter, while the children played underfoot. Joe wrote to her father once, a letter of reconciliation that went unanswered. She tried not to let the silence hurt her, focusing instead on the life she was building with Yates. Each day revealed something new about her husband: his dry sense of humor, his skill with horses, his quiet generosity toward Jackson's children. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, their cabin neared completion. It was modest but solid, with 2 rooms, large windows, and a stone fireplace that Yates had built with particular care. "For you," he said, showing her the mantelpiece he'd carved with intricate patterns. "So you'll have something beautiful to look at during the long winter nights." Joe ran her fingers over the delicate woodwork. "It's stunning. I didn't know you could carve like this." "My grandfather taught me," said. Idle hands led to trouble. He smiled. "Of course, my hands haven't been idle much since I met you." Joe laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Are you complaining, Mr. Morgan?" "Not in the least, Mrs. Morgan." He kissed her softly. "In fact, I was thinking we might make good use of this cabin tonight. Christen it properly." A blush crept up Joe's cheeks. Their physical relationship had blossomed over the weeks, each encounter deepening the bond between them. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither of them had anticipated: a partnership built on mutual respect, growing affection, and an undeniable attraction. "I'd like that," she said. "Very much." That evening, after sharing a meal with Jackson's family, they made their way to their new home. Yates had already moved their few possessions inside and prepared the bedroom with a new feather mattress, a wedding gift from Martha. As they crossed the threshold, Yates swept Joe into his arms, carrying her inside as tradition dictated. She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I believe we did this out of order," she teased. "The wedding night before the home. We seem to do everything out of order," he replied, setting her down gently. "But I can't say I'm dissatisfied with the results." Joe looked around their new home, feeling a surge of pride. "I never thought I'd have this a place that's truly mine. Ours." Yates lit the lamps, casting a warm glow over the rough-hewn furniture and bright quilts Martha had contributed. "It's not much compared to what the judge could have offered." "It's everything," Joe said firmly, "because it's ours by choice, not by arrangement." Yates drew her into his arms. "Speaking of choices, there's something I've been meaning to tell you." Joe looked up at him, curious. "I received a letter yesterday from a friend in Denver. He's offered me a position managing his horse breeding operation. Good pay, a proper house on the property." Joe's heart sank. "You want to leave?" "No," Yates said quickly. "I wanted you to know that there are options, that our future isn't limited to this place if you want more." Joe studied his face, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Is that what you want? To leave?" "What I want," he said slowly, "is wherever you are. If that's here, building this life with Jackson and Martha nearby, I'm content. If it's Denver or beyond, I'll follow. My home is with you now, Joe." The declaration, so simple, so profound, brought tears to her eyes. "When did this happen?" she whispered. "When did this marriage of convenience become so real?" Yates brushed a tear from her cheek. "For me, I think it was real from the moment I saw you shooting at that tree, fury in every line of your body. I'd been watching you for months, telling myself a woman like you would never look twice at a drifter like me. And yet here we are." "Here we are," he agreed, bending to kiss her. Joe melted into his embrace, marveling at how fate had brought them together. What had begun as an escape had become a journey toward something she hadn't known. She was seeking a love built not on obligation or arrangement, but on choice and growing devotion. Later, as they lay in their new bed, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, Joe traced the scar that ran along Yates's collarbone. "Tell me about this," she murmured. "Bar fight in Cheyenne. 3 years ago. Were you defending someone's honor?" He chuckled. "Nothing so noble. I was young and stupid, thought I was invincible. And now I have something worth protecting." He pulled her closer. "Someone worth staying alive for." The sincerity in his voice made her heart swell. "I love you," she said, the words emerging naturally, without premeditation. Yates went still beside her. Then he raised himself on one elbow, looking down at her with an intensity that took her breath away. "Say that again," he whispered. "I love you, Yates Morgan." He closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing the words. When he opened them, the emotion she saw there made her throat tighten. "I've loved you since the moment you agreed to meet me that night," he said. "Even before then, if I'm honest with myself. I never thought I'd have the right to say those words to you." "You have every right," Joe assured him, pulling him down for a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the valley in snow by mid-November. The cabin proved snug and warm, the fireplace drawing well, keeping the bitter cold at bay. Joe established routines, baking bread, mending clothes, reading aloud in the evenings while Yates carved or cleaned his guns. They received word that Judge Whitaker had married a widow from Cheyenne, a woman closer to his own age with a substantial inheritance. Joe felt relief, knowing they were finally free from the threat of his interference. Her father, however, remained estranged. The silence hurt, but Joe found solace in her new family: Yates, Jackson, and Martha, their children who called her Aunt Jo. She was no longer alone. Christmas brought a heavy snowstorm that isolated the homesteads for days. Yates and Joe celebrated quietly, exchanging simple gifts: a new knife for him, a journal bound in soft leather for her. "There's one more thing," Yates said, reaching beneath the bed. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Joe unwrapped it carefully to find a wooden box, intricately carved with flowers and vines. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed work. "Open it." Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Joe gasped, looking up at him in surprise. "How did you—" "Jackson brought it back from Laramie last month. I asked him to find something special." Yates took the locket, opening it to show the empty space inside. "For a likeness when we can get one made. Or perhaps," he hesitated, "for a lock of hair from our first child someday." The suggestion, the first time either of them had mentioned children, brought tears to Joe's eyes. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." He fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers lingering on her skin. "Merry Christmas, Joe." She pulled him close. "Merry Christmas, husband." Spring brought renewal to the land and unexpected news. A letter arrived from Willow Creek, carried by a passing cattle driver. It was from Ellen Thompson, Joe's childhood friend and the daughter of the town's doctor. Joe read it aloud to Yates as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. "Your father has been ill," she read, her voice faltering. "Pneumonia this winter nearly took him. He's recovering now, but the illness has changed him. He speaks of you often, with regret in his voice." Yates watched her carefully. "Do you want to see him?" Joe folded the letter, conflicted. "I don't know. After everything." "He's still your father." Yates took her hand. "And regret is a heavy burden to carry to the grave." The wisdom in his words settled in her heart. "Would you come with me? Try to stop me." He squeezed her hand. "We can leave as soon as the trails are clear." The journey to Willow Creek took 3 days, the spring mud making travel slow. As they crested the final hill overlooking the town, Joe felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. They rode directly to her father's ranch. The place looked neglected: fences in need of repair, the barn roof missing shingles. A young man Joe didn't recognize was chopping wood in the yard. He directed them to the house, eyeing them curiously. Joe hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. Yates placed a reassuring hand on her lower back. "We can still turn around," he offered. She shook her head. "No, I need to do this." The door opened before she could knock. Thomas Foster stood there, thinner than Joe remembered, his face lined with age and illness. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of months of separation hanging between them. "Josephine," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "You came. Ellen wrote to me." Joe struggled to keep her voice steady. "She said you were ill." "I'm better now." His eyes moved to Yates, standing protectively beside her. "Mr. Morgan." "Sir." Yates nodded respectfully. Thomas stepped back. "Come in, please." The interior of the house was much as Joe remembered, though lacking the warmth and order she had maintained. They sat awkwardly in the parlor, the silence thick with unspoken words. "I owe you both an apology," Thomas said abruptly. "Especially you, Josephine. What I tried to do." He shook his head. "There's no excuse." Joe's throat tightened. "Why, Father? Why were you so determined?" Thomas sighed heavily. "Fear. The ranch was failing. Debts piling up. The judge offered to clear them all, to ensure you'd never want for anything." He looked down at his hands. "I convinced myself it was for your own good." "I would rather have lost the ranch than my freedom," Joe said softly. I see that now. He glanced at Yates. I understand you've built a place near Laramie. Yates nodded. With Jackson Mead. Good land, good water. And are you happy, Josephine? The simple question brought tears to her eyes. Yes, father. Very happy. Thomas nodded, a mix of relief and regret crossing his features. That's all a father should want for his daughter. I forgot that for a time. The conversation gradually eased, the initial tension giving way to cautious reconnection. Thomas asked about their life, listened with genuine interest to Joe's descriptions of their cabin, their plans for the future. As evening approached, he surprised them with an offer. Stay. Not just for the night, for as long as you want. This place needs a man who knows ranching, and I'm not getting any younger. He looked directly at Yates. The land will be Josephine's someday anyway. Might as well start making it yours now. Joe exchanged a glance with Yates, seeing the careful consideration in his eyes. We have a home, she said gently. Friends who depend on us. I understand. Thomas nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. It was just a thought. But, Yates added, perhaps we could stay for a while. Help get things back in order before we return. The gratitude in her father's eyes moved Joe deeply. I'd like that, Thomas said. Very much. They stayed for 6 weeks, working from dawn till dusk to restore the ranch. Yates repaired fences and buildings, while Joe brought order back to the house. Together, they helped her father sort through his financial troubles, creating a plan to make the ranch profitable again. Word spread quickly of their return. Some townsfolk were cool, remembering the scandal of Joe's flight. Others, like Ellen and her family, welcomed them warmly. Judge Whitaker, they learned, had moved to Denver with his new wife, removing that particular shadow from their lives. As the time to return to their own home approached, Joe found herself in the garden with her father, planting vegetables that would mature long after she was gone. You've built a good life, Thomas said, patting soil around a tomato seedling. I can see it in your face, in the way you are together. We have, Joe agreed. Though it didn't start the way either of us expected. The best things rarely do. He straightened, wincing slightly at the pain in his back. I've been thinking about what comes next. This place is too much for me alone. We could hire more help, Joe suggested. Or sell some of the back acres. Or, Thomas said carefully, I could come with you. Not to live in your home, he added quickly, seeing her surprise. But nearby. Start fresh somewhere new. The offer stunned her. You'd leave the ranch? After all these years. The ranch is just land, Josephine. You're my family. He looked toward the house, where Yates was visible through the window, repairing a cabinet. Both of you, if you'll have me. Tears filled Joe's eyes. I'd like that, father. Very much. By summer's end, they had sold the ranch to a young couple eager to start their own legacy. Thomas Foster moved into a small cabin Jackson helped build, a short walk from Joe and Yates's home. The old man thrived in the new environment, becoming a favorite of Jackson's children and finding purpose in helping with the lighter work around both properties. On a warm September evening, exactly 1 year after their hasty wedding, Joe and Yates sat on their porch, watching the sunset. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Happy anniversary, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Joe smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her abdomen. I have a gift for you, though it won't arrive for about 7 months. Yates went still beside her. Then he turned, his eyes searching her face. Are you certain? She nodded, joy bubbling up inside her. Martha confirmed it yesterday. The look of wonder that spread across his face was everything Joe could have hoped for. He knelt before her, placing both hands reverently on her still flat stomach. A child, he whispered, Our child. Our family, Jo corrected, thinking of her father, of Jackson and Martha, of the community they had built together. Everything I never knew I wanted until you came into my life. Yates rose to kiss her, pouring all his love and gratitude into the gesture. When I said I'd marry you first, he murmured against her lips, I never imagined how completely you would change my world. Jo laughed softly. For a man of few words, you certainly know the right ones to say. Only to you, he promised. Only ever to you. As twilight deepened around them, Jo reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a desperate escape to this moment of perfect contentment. What had begun as defiance against a fate she couldn't accept had blossomed into a love deeper and richer than anything she could have imagined. In the years that followed, their family grew first with the birth of their daughter, Emma, then 2 years later with twin boys, Samuel and Daniel. Thomas Foster became the doting grandfather he was always meant to be, regaling the children with stories of the old days while teaching them to ride and fish. The breeding operation Yates established gained renown throughout the territory, his eye for horseflesh bringing buyers from as far as Denver and San Francisco. Jo found her own calling, starting a small school for the children of neighboring homesteads, passing on her love of books and learning. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the house was still, Jo would take out the pistol that had started it all, the one she'd used for target practice on that fateful morning. She would polish it carefully before returning it to its box, a reminder of the strength she'd found within herself and the man who had helped her claim her freedom. And each night, as they lay together in the darkness, Yates would hold her close and whisper, "Thank you for meeting me that night." And Jo would smile, pressing a kiss to his chest right above his heart, and reply, "Thank you for marrying me first." In the wild vastness of Wyoming Territory, they had found more than escape, they had found home, in each other's arms and in the life they built together, one choice at a time.